Thanks a lot. Hi, everybody. All right, I'll jump right into it. Cities. They've become sort of the place where we all live today, but they've been a locus of attraction for millennia. Right? That's where ideas come up. That's where people exchange genes, exchange funds. Really the place where humanity produces whatever humanity makes. And they've experienced, sorry, the clicker is stuck. They've experienced unprecedented growth recently. I mean, let's look at some numbers. Today we're at about 54% urbanization around the world. Predicted that by 2050, 2/3 of the world will be urbanized. Now, if you account for population growth, we're talking about as many people as we have on the whole planet today crammed into cities by that time. Okay, significant. Why cities? Why are they interesting? I'll just give some numbers. There are many others. They cover 2% of the Earth's inhabitable crust, so very little land area. About 2/3 of the energy in the world is consumed in cities and in the infrastructures that service them. And in turn, 75% of emissions, CO2 or CO2 equivalent, is created by those infrastructures, by cities themselves. And cities also produce about 80% of the world's GDP. So one way to think about it is that the challenges of cities sort of aligned with those of the entire planet. And if you can do something about it, you really impact the whole world. And it's very effective to do something about it in cities because they're so concentrated in small places, dense places, right? At the same time, we're seeing a big change in technology, right? I bet everybody here in the room has one of these computers. Very strong, right? Stronger than anything we had until the mid-'80s. People can talk to people anywhere. People can talk to machines, right? Our average car today is instrumented with hundreds of sensors, online. You can slap one of those on almost anything. It's a standard machine-to-machine modem, and that becomes connected. So people can talk to people who can talk to machines, who can talk back to people. We're seeing this sort of overlay of digital connectivity and information exchange on our physical environment. Now, even more recently, we're seeing the age-old dream of humanoid robots becoming a reality, right? Maybe that's a niche application. In manufacturing, robots have become ubiquitous. Self-driving car is already an example of how robots begin to make their way into everyday objects, right? It senses, it has autonomy, it moves, it responds, it's totally a robot. And more interestingly, robots begin to merge into our bodies, amplify human capacity, right? So if you think about this as a whole, our environment is becoming instrumented with digital capabilities. We can sense, we can observe at a scale that's massive, we can analyze information, and we can feed it back into responsive objects that can take actions based on what we observe and analyze. So we really create this sort of responsive environment that can optimize itself to our needs and respond. So at Senseable City Lab at MIT, what we ask is, how can we take advantage of this new condition to improve cities, to improve life in cities? Right? We started at about 12 years ago, in 2004. Today there's a lot of work going on this subject. Some of the work that I'm going to show today started at the lab and actually was spun off into startups. I'll give examples of this exploration through two projects, and specifically we'll focus on the issue of mobility. Right, mobility is an issue that's easy to explain because we're all familiar with, right? It's a pain, and it crosses continents. We're spending so much time today on the road that beyond impact to air quality, productivity loss, it's just a pain to people's life. They're sick of spending hours in the car. It sucks, right? So we're beginning to see big pressure to find an alternative to this. Now, this problem is only going to get worse. Remember sort of having trouble with the clicker. Earlier issues related to urbanization and its growth. Couple that with the growth of the middle class And look at what happens to demand for urban mobility. It's predicted that by 2050, we'll have 2.6x the demand for urban mobility that we have today. Now, these are the conservative estimates. Now, think of places like Mexico City, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., Lagos, right? Paris. And put 3 times more cars there, right? It's impossible. Some of those are impossible today already, let alone with such growth. So there really needs to be a paradigm shift in terms of how we create vehicles, how we use them, how we move around in cities altogether. Now, people are beginning to get that point. This is growth in highway miles driven in the US versus growth in public transport, right? This is the United States, and look what's happening with public transport, surpasses in growth the growth of population. Miles driven per car in Europe in decline straight since 1990, including Germany, right? So people are beginning to move away farther and farther from the car as the go-to mode for transportation. This is an interesting graph because it talks about the percentage of people who have a driver's license in the United States in different age groups. Look at age 18. Look at 2014 versus 1983, right? 1983, over 80% of teenagers had a driver's license. 2014, it's slightly under 60. I think it's 58%. Now that's dramatic, right? That means, like, in the past, go back to the 50s, you could never get a girlfriend or a boyfriend if you didn't have a car. You wouldn't get a job, right? It was part of your identity. And that has eroded. Like, another way of thinking about this is if, I were to show up to MIT with a Ferrari in 1980, I would be the coolest guy on campus. If I did it today, people would think I have a problem, right? So that's serious. It means that the emotional plane is eroding in relation to the car. So one way to think about this is, how can we do with fewer cars to begin with? So we asked ourselves, can we use data? In this case, we looked at New York, grabbed data from 150 million trips of where the taxis are in order to come up with an efficient use of that resource, reducing the number of cars. So the yellow is pickup, the blue is drop-offs. We analyze that data and ask, can we combine trips by putting more than one person in a car in an efficient way, using an algorithm that can eventually run in real time for dispatch, right? The first thing we found was that there's a great deal of symmetry in demand for transportation in the city. This is just one example. It was all over the place between different places. That already suggested something interesting in terms of what you can do to optimize the system. Eventually, this was published in the Proceeding for the National Academy of Science in an article that pointed mainly that if you create a shareability network from those trips, you're able to optimize for 2 parameters: delay time, which is the time you have to wait extra for a pool taxi versus a private taxi, and distance, where it will drop you off or pick you up versus if you were in a private taxi. What we found is that if you wait no more than 2 extra minutes and be dropped off or picked up no more than 50 meters away from where you would have been with a private taxi, you can actually use 40% less taxis in New York and keep service the same, right? And that's all because of the type of mathematical solution that we found to that problem. And now, if you couple that with robots, right, and you really can start to think about this as a mode of public transportation, as an agile network, then analysis shows that you can use, you can service the same demand, sorry, again, problems, with as few as 20% of the cars we have on the road today, right, if you fix demand. And that's dramatic. Now, moving further, we can ask, well, how can we make the transport systems in the city more human scale, right? What are new modes of transportation that are closer in scale to that of our body? And the reason why it's interesting specifically is because that even if we all had self-driving cars today, right, and you put 2 or 2.5 people in a car, it still will not solve the problem that we looked at earlier. It would still require twice as many cars on the road by 2050. right? Because of the form factor, 5 people in one vehicle. How many of you would like to be with 4 others in a vehicle, dropping them off on your way to work every day, all the time? It's not going to happen, right? So we need smaller occupancy vehicles. We need larger shared vehicles. One good candidate for single occupancy vehicles is the bike. It's actually experiencing a renaissance today. This is an image from New York. It's happening all over the world. Look at growth in the US, which is not known as a cycling country. Numbers are still low, but the growth is tremendous. That's for commuting, right? Bicycle sharing systems are popping up all over the world. This is Hangzhou, the largest system in the world. But there's a fundamental problem with cycling. Look at London as we move from the end of the 1880s toward the 1960s with the introduction of motorized transportation. Look what happens to the footprint of the city. That's 1965. Right? The city almost grew tenfold in land area in that time. The human body of most people is not physically capable of providing enough energy to cycle through those distances. In some cases it's possible, but for the average person, 85% of people cannot deal with the footprints of the cities we built for motorized transportation. Now, if you want to go back to non-motorized transportation, you're stuck. So we asked ourselves, how can we address this problem? We started with a partnership with the Lord Mayor of Copenhagen back then, Rit Bjerregaard. Copenhagen was interesting because until the early 70s, it was a car city, like many other cities in the area. And then, by 2013, it became that. Okay, they took some very serious policy measures to increase cycling. Now, interestingly enough, they invested in infrastructure, they taxed cars, and the growth in cycling grew with their investment. But at some point, it plateaued. 1/3 by bike, 1/3 by public transport, 1/3 by car. They kept on investing, and it wouldn't grow. So we asked ourselves, well, what's the actual limit they came against? And it became quite obvious. It was distance. Right? Again, that physical ability of our body. 15 kilometers turned out to be the magic number where use of cycling really drops. Hills are a big issue as well when we studied other places. So we thought we were smart. We said, let's motorize the bike. Thought we had a good idea. That's the first patent, I think, on electric bikes is from 1897. Right? It's an old idea. And it's a big market, actually. It's selling all over Europe very well, growing in the United States, right? It's multi-billion dollars. Very expensive each unit, and it's still selling. But if you look at the products, they're very heavy, they're clunky, they're super pricey. It's hard to believe that you're going to see hundreds of millions of people thinking of these vehicles as an alternative to driving a car, right? So what can we do to make them better? What can we do to completely change that paradigm? We decided to focus on robotics. Let the bicycle be a commodity and invest where we can really make an impact when it comes to design, when it comes to robots, when it comes to information connectivity. So we created a standalone wheel, something that you can put on any bicycle, and it augments the rider. It completely imitates the person like an exoskeleton, but makes the person 10 times stronger, seamlessly. You don't even know. You think you're Superman. This started at MIT and then was spun off into a company called Superpedestrian that brought it to market, a company that I'm involved with. This is the product and what it looks like. Inside that wheel, there's a motor, which is also a generator, a set of batteries, 12 sensors, an embedded control system, and wireless connectivity. When you pedal, the wheel learns what you do with your legs, the very minute things you do, and then it imitates you. Right? Seamlessly integrates. You can think of this wheel also as a platform, right? So it collects information from the environment you ride through. You can share it with the platform through the cloud, with other cyclists, and you can write applications to it like you write for a smartphone. If you're sort of more of the competitive type, you can think of it as a legal performance enhancer. Here's an example of what it's like to ride it. You just pedal, right? You control it with your phone. You can lock and unlock it. It only works for you. Everything happens in the background. This is the data that's collected, your calorie output, cadence, power. If you're a geek, you can find a wealth of data there. And in the background, This is information that you don't see as a rider. That's a system monitoring itself to make sure it's safe and healthy. Right? So there's a great deal of intelligence in the system built in. Now, take a step back and ask yourself, what could this city look like in the future if we reclaimed space, right? If we started to use roads in a smarter way, things that are more at the scale of a human, with softer vehicles, smaller ones, with far fewer cars, perhaps that's an image we can get inspired by. Thank you